Hey everybody, I'm Zach.
And I'm Jesse.
You're watching Disruptive Investing News. Okay, so this next news story is more of a connection of a bunch of unfolding news stories. It's a pattern, if you will, that has been unfolding for months now.
And because we follow this space closely every week, it appears to be heading somewhere, and we thought we should share our perspective with you, our Disruptive Investing viewers.
So you can think of it as a disruption on a global scale. So it first started by the emerging technology of EVs and solar and wind and geothermal and batteries. And then how that technology changed government policy here in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act being signed into law last August.
Then how that law gave incentives to consumers and companies here in North America, which almost overnight started a mad rush to build factories in North America.
Then other countries went, hey, US, you're luring all our companies away. No fair. So then those countries started working on laws of their own.
And as we speak, the EU is working on what's being called the EU Green Deal, or more formally, the Net Zero Industry Act.
For instance, VW has just paused plans to build 6 new EV and battery factories in Europe because they have estimated that building those plants in the US instead would generate $10.5 billion in incentives, loans, and subsidies.
This is like a giant chess match now, with companies moving their pieces, factories, where it makes the most financial sense.
So if governments want to affect where these factories and all their associated jobs and tax revenue go, then they'll need to meet or beat the roughly $369 billion IRA subsidy package that the U.S. enacted.
And the EU is not alone. We're talking China here too.
Yeah, the IRA was great if you're a believer like we are in sustainable transportation and energy, because it's forcing many governments to incentivize these technologies if they want to keep them on their soil.
And I would argue that the first mover has a huge advantage, because once you start building factories, you have outlaid capital for years, and that ship is hard to turn around. So good move, US, finally.
Yeah, and so, I mean, if we take a look at just VW as one example here, right? They have 6 gigafactory size factories that they were going to build in Europe. They have 3 of them already kind of located, 3 more they don't know exactly where yet. And I think this was a move by them to say, here's where we could build them, Europe, if you will kind of match the incentives that the U.S. is giving us. Or, you know what we'll do this week? We'll put them all on pause. And so we'll wait to see what your bill is going to look like, because this week we should be seeing more of the details of that bill. Many people don't think that Europe is going to be able to match the U.S. And then companies are going to have to go back and go, well, we kind of really did want to put the plant here in Europe, and we are going to get some money, so maybe we'll still build it here. My thought, though, is that because the U.S. was so out in front, I mean, this was last summer, that basically a lot of these companies already knew, okay, well, here's that deal, and if we don't get in on that deal soon enough, we're just missing out to our competition. So what we've been watching for months is that billions of dollars of capital have moved over to these shores, because why? They can get the tax incentives for themselves and for their customers. Now, I know that a lot of people watching are like, government bailout, government subsidies, that blah, blah, it sucks. Maybe that's your take on government. But the fact is, governments enact policies. And when you enact a policy like this, it has worked for the U.S. And that's why all these other governments are so upset at the U.S., because it's not like they had the rug pulled out from under them. They're like, well, this is great. EV revolution will be happening right here on our shores. And it was like, hey, wait, whoa, where is everyone going?
Right.
All those companies are coming to North America right now. And I think this is also why Tesla just announced the opening of the Gigafactory in Mexico.
It falls under the IRA,
Exactly.
so they're going to be getting tax credits from vehicles produced in that facility.
And they get the cheap labor. I mean, It's kind of a win-win. The U.S. was smart, I think, in allowing Mexico and Canada to be part of this, because you get the cheap labor down in Mexico, you get a big market up in Canada as well, and it keeps everything kind of over here, which means that all the jobs not only stay here, but many jobs come here.
Right. And I mean, this is just good news in general. I'm not like the biggest fan of government subsidies. I don't think that like governments should be subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, for example. But they have been for every single year that you've been alive and I've been alive. They've been subsidizing it to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars. The global governments, I mean, it's an astounding amount of money. And so now that we have some incentives going in for EVs and sustainable technologies, it's going to move the ball faster, especially once we start to see competition between different countries.
Yeah. And so it's kind of amazing to see on a global scale, disruption in one tech sector actually affects everything once you apply a policy to it. I know it's a big concept, but it's something you should keep your eye on because it's not just the big companies like Tesla, which we follow every week. It's companies that are making solar panels and inverters, and companies like VinFast from Vietnam, a company you probably wouldn't have even heard of, except they're being attracted now to build a plant here in the US. I mean, I think it was delayed till 2025, but still they wouldn't have even probably come here, except that they're like, oh crap, there's a big reason to be here.
And none of this would have happened, I think, without Tesla. If Tesla hadn't proved that EVs were a thing, like they're a thing now. In 2015, they were not a thing. You'd be like, oh yeah, it's a fancy rich person car. And now that people like me can afford a Model 3, I think it really changes the perspective that a lot of people have, where they're starting to see people drive these cars. Our representatives in government, they're saying like, okay, EVs are here to stay. It's a legitimate thing. And if we're not going to move fast on this, other countries are going to take the lead and steal it from us.
And here's the thing. You have to keep your eye on disruption. It happens now so fast. As we've been talking about on the show a lot, the rate of innovation is increasing. So it's hard to spot now. And we talk about AI, like ChatGPT. For some people, they think, oh, it's just a little fad. It's a trend. It's what we're talking about for a couple of weeks and then it'll move on. I don't think so. I think that these are things you have to really say, oh my goodness, this is a big deal. There's 500 startups working on that right now. Why? Because it is super disruptive. And once you find this disruption, you have to make sure as a government that you keep this in your place. Otherwise, it just moves to wherever the cheapest place is to make it or the easiest place to make it. And that brings me to states. If we look at the number of companies that are moving out of New York State, California State, because it's so hard to do business there, and they're moving to business-friendly states like Texas. Hey, states, if you want to keep businesses in your state, you can't make it impossible to build new buildings. I mean, Elon talks about this all the time. We're making it almost impossible now to build infrastructure. We want to be a manufacturing powerhouse. We talk about the good old days of when we used to make stuff here. Well, then you have to allow companies to build those factories. And instead, a lot of states are slow on giving incentives. They're slow on granting permits. And I mean, let's look to Germany, a country where it's almost impossible to build anything, and where Tesla right now is going to be criminally charged because they put some concrete piles in the ground.
I mean, let's be honest. They're probably not going to be criminally charged. There's been this, group that has talked to the prosecutor over there to try to get them criminally charged. I don't necessarily see it happening, but it really just shows that like the culture of the place has a lot to do with whether or not you can do stuff, because it's
Exactly.
like, right, we're not seeing this kind of, mommy state government in Texas.
Right.
And it's like, why do you think that Texas started, building their factory later than Giga Berlin, and is getting their factory up and running faster than Giga Berlin?
Right.
And they're not getting sued all the time and being, yelled at for putting in concrete pilings.
And that's kind of what I'm talking about here. You may not be, a state representative or a federal representative, but you are a citizen of where you live, and you can influence your government representatives. You need to make it clear to them that if they don't move quickly nowadays with disruption happening faster, your place, your town, your state will be left behind. And so it's really important that you educate those people on what's going on, because so many people out there, they don't know about EVs yet. They don't know about solar and wind and batteries. They don't know about the robots that are coming, the AI that's coming. They don't know about VPPs. They don't know about any of this stuff. Right. And by the time they do, other states will have already found homes for these companies, and your state will be left out.
Because right now we're going through this big paradigm shift where it doesn't really matter what's happened in the past, right? Because things have actually changed. The days of cheap Chinese labor are kind of gone.
Yep.
They've developed their middle class. So it's no longer is it just like everyone's going to work in a factory. Are there factories over there? Sure. Is it cheaper than working here? Sure. But we've seen the disadvantages that has, whether it's from, supply chain collapse when the littlest little thing happens, to just, I don't know.
Geopolitical stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, having to rely on your enemy to supply you with stuff. And lastly here, you might be like, well, Zach, I mean, what can I do? Well, look at states like Mississippi that we reported on recently, or Wisconsin, where they're actually passing active laws to stop EVs from being sold in their states. That's the kind of stuff that you have to, as a citizen, work against, because if you're not a friendly state to this innovation, you will be at the bottom of the list.
You'll be left behind, and don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't shoot yourself in the foot like that.
Hey, we put out news stories like this every week on Disruptive Investing. We also do cool interviews. We have one recently with Clarity, which is a company that we are invested in, and I think you should check it out. They do something really cool. We'll show you all about it. So go check that out. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so that we can bring you more really cool companies and information on Disruptive Investing.
We'll see you next time on Disruptive Investing.